There is a kind of determination that has no audience. It does not perform itself for approval. It does not wait for acknowledgement or encouragement or the confirming nod of someone who has noticed the effort and found it impressive. It exists in the dark, in the early morning, in the cold, on roads that have no witnesses and no cameras and no one watching who might later say, "I saw what you did, I saw what it cost you, I saw you choose to go anyway." It exists in the private interior of a person who has decided that something matters enough to go toward it regardless of what the going requires. And it is, in its quiet and unwitnessed form, one of the most extraordinary things a human being is capable of. This is a story about that kind of determination. And it begins, as such stories tend to begin, not in a moment of triumph but in a moment of ordinary darkness. The darkness before dawn, before the day has arranged itself into anything, when the choice to begin is made in the complete absence of any guarantee that beginning will lead anywhere worth going. The boy's name was Kofi. He was 12 years old. He lived in a village in rural Ghana, in the kind of village that exists in the space between what maps show and what lives actually are, a cluster of homes and a market and a well and the particular community of people who have known each other long enough that the knowing has become part of the texture of ordinary life. The village was not poor in the way that photographs of poverty tend to frame poverty, dramatically, in terms of what is visibly absent. It was simply a village with modest resources and significant dignity and the specific, practical intelligence of people who had learned to make things work in circumstances that required making things work. The school was 10 miles away. Not 10 miles in the sense of a well-maintained road with gentle gradients and regular landmarks to measure progress against. 10 miles in the sense of unpaved paths that the rains transformed into something closer to a riverbed than a road, of hills that did not arrange themselves conveniently on the outward journey so that the return journey was easier, of distances measured not in time or effort but in the particular, accumulating weight of a body that has been moving since before the sun came up and still has miles to go before the thing it came for is within reach. 10 miles each way. 20 miles a day. 5 days a week. For a school year that lasted 9 months. Kofi had not been asked to do this. Nobody had sat him down and outlined the requirements and waited for his agreement. The school existed and the school was 10 miles away and Kofi wanted to go to school, and these 3 facts, combined, produced the daily walk with the same inevitability that hunger produces the search for food. He wanted the thing. The thing required the walk. He walked. His family did not have money for transport. In the years before the school built the partial bus route that would eventually reduce the distance for some students. His family did not have, for the first 2 years of his walking, reliable shoes. He wore what was available, which was sometimes sufficient and sometimes not, and when it was not he wore what his feet had become through 2 years of 10-mile mornings, which was something considerably more durable than what he had started with. He did not frame this as hardship. He did not frame it as anything. It was the situation. The situation required waking before dawn and walking, and he woke before dawn and he walked. He woke at 4:30 in the morning. In the darkness, in the particular silence of a village before its day has begun, he ate whatever his mother had prepared, sometimes substantial, sometimes not, depending on what the week had allowed, and he put on his clothes and he picked up his bag, which contained his books and his notebook and the single pen that he protected with the specific and slightly anxious care of someone who understands that the pen is not replaceable without significant sacrifice, and he stepped out into the dark morning and began. The first mile was through the village, along paths he knew so completely that he could have walked them without sight. The second mile was the start of the open road, where the village gave way to the agricultural land that surrounded it, and where the darkness was wider and the sounds were the sounds of the early morning world doing its particular work. Birds beginning, insects concluding, the particular rustle of a landscape shifting from night to day. He walked through this transition every morning of every school week for years, and he knew it with the intimacy of someone who has paid attention to the same thing repeatedly until the repetition itself becomes a kind of knowledge. Not factual knowledge but something more physical than that, more embedded, the knowledge of a body that has moved through a landscape so many times that the landscape has become part of what the body knows. The 3rd and 4th miles were the hardest in the rainy season. The path dropped into a low area where the water collected and the ground became unreliable, and the walk required a constant navigation of where to put your feet that was more demanding than simply moving forward. He learned this navigation the way you learn any physical skill, through failure and adjustment and the gradual accumulation of a map inside him that knew where the solid ground was even when the surface gave no visual indication of solid ground. He slipped and fell in those early months. He arrived at school muddy and wet and, on the worst days, scraped on the hands or knees where the falling had expressed itself. He arrived, which was the point. Miles 5 through 7 were the long middle, the part where the destination was no longer close enough to the beginning to carry the momentum of starting and not yet close enough to the end to carry the momentum of almost there. This was the part where the tiredness was most honest and the question of whether the walking was worth it arrived with the most force and the least convenient timing. He did not have a philosophy for this. He was 12 years old and then 13 and then 14, and philosophy was not the resource he was drawing on. He was drawing on something simpler and more reliable than philosophy. He was drawing on wanting. On the specific, clear, entirely uncomplicated wanting of a boy who had understood, earlier than most and more completely than most, what the school and the learning inside it were for. He had understood it from his father, who had not gone to school past the age of 10 and who carried this fact not as a wound but as a precise and useful knowledge of what its absence had cost him. His father was an intelligent man. Kofi knew this with the certainty of someone who had watched intelligence operate without the tools that education provides, and had seen both what it could do without those tools and what it could not. He had watched his father solve complex practical problems with a quickness that Kofi recognized as the same quickness he felt in himself when a new idea arrived and connected to something he already knew. And he had watched his father be unable to access certain rooms, not physical rooms, but the rooms that literacy and qualification open, the conversations and the opportunities and the options that exist on the other side of a level of education his father had never reached. Kofi wanted those rooms. Not abstractly, not as a principle, concretely, specifically, with the particular hunger of someone who can see the door and understands what is required to open it and is willing to pay what the opening costs. The walk was what it cost. He paid it, 5 days a week, in early mornings and tired afternoons, and the specific endurance of 10 miles each way across terrain that did not accommodate his schedule. The other students at the school knew about the walk. Not all of them understood it the same way. Some of the students who lived in the town, for whom school was a short and unremarkable commute, regarded Kofi's journey with a mixture of admiration and something that was not quite sympathy but was adjacent to it. The slightly uncomfortable recognition of someone observing an effort whose scale they could not fully imagine from the inside of their own comfortable arrangement. Some of them admired him in the way you admire something from a safe distance, without quite being willing to examine what the admiration implied about the choices available to you and whether you were making equivalent use of them. His teacher noticed something different in him. Not intelligence exactly. There were other intelligent students with more resources and more preparation and easier access to the books and the materials that turn intelligence into capability. What she noticed was the quality of his attention during the hours he had. The way he listened. The way he wrote things down, not everything, not reflexively, but selectively, with the discrimination of someone who understood that the notebook had a finite number of pages and that what you chose to write in it was itself a form of decision-making. The way he stayed after class on the days when staying after class did not add catastrophically to the walk home. The way he treated the hours inside the classroom as what they were, hours that had been earned by miles of pre-dawn road and that were not to be squandered on inattention or boredom or the comfortable assumption that the information would be available again if you missed it the first time. It would not always be available again. He knew this. He had walked too far for it to be available again. There was a morning, he was 13, in his second year of the walk, at a point when the novelty of the determination had worn off and the reality of it had become its own kind of weight, when he woke at 4:30 and lay in the dark and did not immediately move. The tiredness was real and it was specific and it sat in his legs and his back with the particular honesty of a body that has been doing something demanding without adequate rest for longer than bodies are designed to do such things without complaint. The dark was complete and the silence was the silence of a world that was not yet asking anything of anyone, and in the silence the question arrived with unusual clarity. Why? Not as despair. He was not a despairing person. It was not in his nature and his nature had not yet been given sufficient cause to acquire it. But as a genuine question, the kind that arrives in the dark when the usual momentum of habit and routine is temporarily suspended and the choice that habit usually makes automatic is suddenly, briefly, actually a choice. Why walk? Why this? Why not the shorter path, the easier life, the acceptance of the situation as it was rather than the insistence on making it into something it was not yet? Why 10 miles, every morning, in the dark, alone, for years, toward a destination that was not guaranteed to deliver what it promised in any specific or calculable way? He lay there for a few minutes. Not long. And then he got up. Not because he had answered the question with a satisfying philosophical resolution. He got up because the alternative was not getting up, and not getting up was the one thing that had never, even on the hardest mornings, felt like an option he was willing to choose. He got up because wanting and getting up were, for him, the same thing, expressed in two different verbs. He put on his clothes and picked up his bag and stepped into the dark and began. He finished school at the top of his class. Not every year. Some years the circumstances of a family that was always managing its own difficulty pressed hard enough on the studying time that the top of the class was not reachable. But he finished with results that opened the door he had been walking toward. A scholarship was available, a competitive one, for students from his region who had demonstrated the specific combination of academic performance and personal character that the scholarship committee was looking for. His teacher wrote him a letter of recommendation that was, by her own later account, the most honestly enthusiastic letter she had written in 20 years of teaching. Not because of the grades alone. Because of the walk. Because she had watched someone decide, every day for years, that the thing they wanted was worth whatever the wanting required. He got the scholarship. He went to the university in the city. He sat in his first lecture in a large hall surrounded by students from cities and schools with resources he had never had access to, and he felt something that he took a moment to identify because it was a feeling he had not quite felt before in the specific form it arrived in that moment. He felt ready. Not certain and not effortless and not without the knowledge of how much he still did not know. But ready. Ready in the way that someone is ready who has been working toward something for long enough that the working has built in them a capacity for the thing itself that comfort and ease and convenient access alone cannot build. He thought, in that first lecture, about the walks. About the particular mile that followed the flooded section in the rainy season, where the ground began to firm again and the road turned slightly upward and the sky was always lighter by that point, light enough to see by, not yet fully day, and the feeling of that specific transition, morning after morning for years, which he had never named at the time but which he recognized now, sitting in the large hall, as something he would not trade. The darkness and the distance and the particular, unwitnessed, entirely private determination of a boy who walked 10 miles every morning because the thing at the end of the 10 miles was worth it. He became a teacher. This is not where every story of determination ends, and it is not the only ending that would have honored what the walk contained. But it is where this story ended, and it ended here with a particular symmetry that was not planned but felt, when it arrived, completely right. He became a teacher in a school not unlike the one he had walked 10 miles to reach. He taught children who lived at various distances from the school, some of them walking considerable distances themselves, and he was not the teacher who made speeches about the importance of education or who deployed the dramatic language of inspirational rhetoric. He was the teacher who was always there when the school opened, who was never among those who found reasons to close early, who treated every hour of the school day as what it was, time that some of his students had walked a very long way to access, and that deserved, accordingly, to be worth every step. He told the story of his walk only when asked. He did not use it as a motivational device or a personal myth or a way of establishing his own credentials as someone who had suffered sufficiently to earn the right to speak. He told it when a student was struggling and had asked him, honestly, how to keep going when keeping going was hard. He told it as one person's experience, offered without the claim that it was universal or that the particular form his determination had taken was the only valid form. He told it because it was true and because true things, told honestly, tend to find the people who need them. He told them what he had learned from the miles. That determination is not a feeling. It is not motivation, which comes and goes with the weather of your inner life. It is not inspiration, which arrives as a gift and cannot be reliably summoned. Determination is a practice. It is the choice, made every morning in the dark when no one is watching, to get up and put on your clothes and pick up your bag and step out into whatever the morning is and begin. It is not made once. It is made every day. And every day it is made, it becomes fractionally easier to make the next day, and the day after that, until the making of it is so habitual that it no longer feels like a choice at all, only like what you do, only like who you are. The walk built him. Not the destination, the walk. The 10 miles built something in him that the arrival at the school could not have built, because arrival is easy and it is the going that requires and therefore produces. It built a relationship to difficulty that was not adversarial and not triumphant but simply practical, the relationship of someone who has learned that difficulty is traversable, that 10 miles is walkable, that the morning on the other side of the early rising is worth getting up for even when the early rising is the hardest thing in the available world at that particular moment. He had wanted something. He had gone toward it. The going had made him into someone capable of what he was going toward. This is not a paradox, it is simply how it works, how it has always worked, for anyone who has ever walked a long distance toward something they genuinely wanted. The distance does not obstruct the becoming. The distance is the becoming. 10 miles. Every morning. 5 days a week. 4 years. In the dark, before the sun, before the world was watching, before anyone had confirmed that the arriving would be worth the going. He got up and he went. And he arrived. And what he arrived at, in the end, was not just the school. It was himself, the specific, determined, unwitnessed, completely earned version of himself that the walk had built, mile by mile, morning by morning, in the dark, alone, on an unpaved road in rural Ghana, with his bag and his notebook and his one pen and the wanting that was larger than the distance. The wanting that was always larger than the distance.